Hi class, Joyce Fernandez here, back again. We are now into week 11, and on the calendar it says broadcast interview. The broadcast part of the term, broadcast interview, was just to bring in some familiarity. You have all listened to interviews on podcasts, on radio shows, television, on the internet, so that format that you hear that's really ubiquitous at this point is what I'm going to ask you to do. Of course, your presentation is not going into mass communication. It can be very personal. It can be very much home, right? When the pandemic first hit, I asked students to interview people closest to them with safety first. So, wear your mask if you need to. Many, many wonderful interviews came right out of the family, with parents interviewing their children or their grandparents or their neighbors. This is the art of listening and the art of conversation. You do it naturally. If you look on week 11, you will see that I do have a handout. That's up there. I'm going to try to get to it right now. And let's see, week 11, it starts off with a discussion board by Marianne Atencio saying what makes you special. And that is the discussion board for week 11. And then there's a handout called The Art of Asking Questions. And you open that up. I just don't want you to be intimidated by the word broadcast. It means the assignment is to do an interview, have a conversation with someone where you are the presenter, so you will be in charge of the questions, but you are going to be doing more listening. And then if you look at the handout, it goes through very basic key concepts of what goes into an interview. The introduction, the body, the conclusion, just like any other presentation, the types of questions you would have. And if you'd never analyzed the questions in an interview, when you look at what they have here on the handout, they talk about closed questions, which are natural questions. Like if you were to interview me, you might say, "Hi, what is your name?" I say, "It's Joyce Fernandez." Closed question. Where do you work? Bristol Community College. Closed question. What is your profession? Teacher. Closed question. Why are you a teacher? Open question. Not easy answers, not a yes or no or a concrete answer. You get more into a discussion with someone with open questions. And then probing questions are when you go a little bit more deeper. No, you go deeper into asking the what, where, why, how. And then hypotheticals are fun too. If you were to interview me about being a teacher, a hypothetical question might be, what would you be doing if you weren't a teacher? And you know what I think the answer would be? I'd be selling cars because I love cars. Of course, that's $90 a week on the car lot, but I would probably be selling Volvos. That's what I would do. So those are the types of questions that are natural. If you never read the handout and you don't watch the other two videos I have after this, and I just asked you to do an interview, you would be fine. As soon as you start analyzing something, you might start to get more intimidated. So don't let that happen. Say, okay, I have to interview someone. So first step is to find someone to interview. Find someone who is willing to be part of the class assignment. Someone who says, oh, I know, I'm going to be interviewed on camera, on tape, and others are going to see it. So you have to get their permission. There was a time where I used to ask you to have your guests sign the permission list, but through the pandemic, I have just on a system that you are going to ask someone who's willing to do it. And then figure out, what are you going to interview this person about? The interview should last about 5 minutes, right? So what can I interview the person about? Maybe about their past. Maybe you're interviewing your grandmother and you're going to ask her, what was her life in school like? How much schooling did she get? Did she go to high school? What was that like? Were there proms? You start asking questions to older people about their past. Oftentimes, you will find surprising conversations ensue. Or maybe it's a good friend who's going into biology or does skiing or whitewater rafting, or they're into music, and you want to ask about that. So there's always going to be a theme. It's not just randomly just chatting with someone. There's going to be a plan. And you, as the student, Once you find your person and your topic, come up with about 10 questions that you put on a notepad, or you put it, on a clipboard, and you have your questions right there all written out of what you think would be good questions to ask to get out the information. And some of these will be quite obvious, right? And you just plan it out. And then when you're actually conducting the interview, that's when you might find that you have way too many questions and you go off your own list. I will never see the list of questions. I just want you to be prepared. But if you're a good listener, you will find you doing follow-up questions. Keep an eye on the clock. So when it gets closer to 5 minutes, you know you have to wrap it up, because this is supposed to be like as if you were in a talk show setting or you were on a radio podcast, and the assignment was for a 5-minute interview. And we see them all the time. We really do. If we were face to face, we would be doing this in the television studio. So it adds a little element of excitement, but nevertheless, I have had fine interviews coming on Zoom and coming through what we're doing now through the VoiceThread. Really good ones. So find someone you can interview. It may be long distance. Maybe you're going to do a Zoom with someone who's in Tennessee or California or Australia, someone you know, and you're going to interview one, and make sure you record it so we can see both participants, right? And we can hear it. So you're conducting an interview. When you read my handout, I give instructions for the introduction. I say to look right at the camera, because I'm acting as if this is a talk show. But if you don't do it exactly as I have on the guidelines, it's fine. It really is. So it says here, introduction. Greet your audience, because you have a television audience. Say, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today on Joyce's Corner. Today I have my grandmother, Agnes Gankars, who immigrated from Poland back in the 1800s, and I'm going to ask her about what that was like for her. Then I look at my guest. So you look at the camera, you tell if you have a name of your talk show, great, say whatever it is, tell us who your guest is, and then you look at your guest. And the entire interview, you should be looking at your guest. If we only see the side of you on the camera and we can hear you, that is absolutely fine. So I'm going to interview your guest, and you're going to thank them for coming, and then you will start your interview, right? When it gets closer to the end, and you know you have to do like a wrap-up, you could even conclude an interview like this by saying to your guest, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for coming. And then you look back at the camera and you thank your audience for listening, and you say bye. And that's it. So we do this in the TV studio. But if you don't do that exact look in the camera, look at your guest, look back at your camera, that's fine. But I'm emulating what it would be like if this was a broadcast interview. So you follow along on the handout, whatever makes sense to you. What other things that I've included in week 11 was 2 videos that I used for the first time last semester that seemed to help students. One is called The Art of Asking Questions by Dan Moulthrop, and this is not a discussion board, but within it he gives 8 tips. He says, be unafraid when you're asking questions, be curious, try the obvious questions, words matter, so pick your words carefully, strive for empathy, right? Be informed, be simple, and be gracious, right? I had a student once who brought her mother into the TV studio, and her mother is bipolar. And the mother knew she was going to be speaking about being bipolar. And this is a disorder that the student had lived with all her life because her mother's bipolar, but the mother was great. She was managing her symptoms. And so she had to be careful in how she approached this. Even though this was her mother, she might feel if she was doing this in her kitchen, she might have been freer, but she was conscious of the fact of being empathetic to her mother, and it turned into a great interview. And the other video is it says, Ask Better Questions to Build Better Connections, and by Amber L. Wright. And it's so true. If you want to build a rapport with someone, you ask questions to show you care. So when you take this assignment on, find a person that's most obvious, your spouse, your children, your neighbors, but maybe at work. So I know my students who work in group settings, like in the hospital settings or firefighter or police, they have they have their colleagues around them. So you might ask one, could I just interview for 5 minutes for my class? The good thing to do is do a pre-interview and say, okay, we're going to be doing this like next week or whatever. I want to come up with a theme. And the person you're interviewing might help you with the theme, right? Or you might have your own theme. And then ask them in general, is it okay if I ask you about this? So you always want to be sure that the person you're interviewing is comfortable with the questions. And then have fun with it. Many students have said after doing the interview, they'd rather do an interview than do their own presentation. They like it. And you listen to people in right now in your culture who you listen to, either in podcasts. I listen to Willie Geist podcasts. I listen to Brené Brown. I listen to Anderson Cooper. I listen to Howard Stern's interviews. I don't think he has a podcast, but I've heard him on Sirius XM, and I like when he does interviews. I like when Oprah Winfrey does an interview. Years ago, back in the day, it was Barbara Walters. But every morning show, be it ABC, NBC, or CBS, they have people who interview, right? Like Deborah Roberts or Savannah Guthrie or Craig Melville or Al Roker. I love the ones on CBS. Oh, there's Gayle King. On Saturdays, there's a Saturday morning show, and they have this woman who I love when she interviews. Her name is Michelle, and then Dana and Jeffrey, and that's the whole show is interviewing people. Pre-recorded ones, sometimes live, but usually pre-recorded and bringing them in. And like I said, these shows are ubiquitous. We're so used to it, right? That we don't even realize there's an art to interviewing and there's a skill set in interviewing. So you're going to practice. This whole semester has been one big practice. I think you're going to have fun with it. There will be no journal critique after this. There will be none. So when I look at the calendar now, I say, you know what I'll do? I won't give an end date on this interview. I know some of you have had problems with technology. So instead of saying do it in a week, I would say make sure it's in by 2 weeks. That's what I mean by end date. Yeah, there's an end date, but not a whole week. See if there's someone you could interview and that you would want to interview. You might just make someone's day by saying, I want to interview you. I've had mothers interview their young children. 6-year-olds have been interviewed. 6-year-olds and grandparents. It seems like, go through the generations, ask questions, show that you care. So you pick whoever you feel comfortable and who's willing to do it. And then after this speech, the last very speech, as we exercise our momentum of oral communication, is called a personal experience brief opinion. Usually by the time the students get to that speech, they're like, I'm done. But that was supposed to be done with ease, that you didn't struggle as much. So you have the interview, then you have the personal experience brief opinion, and then the final exam. I'll be putting the final exam up sometime this week in week 11, and it'll be due by May 12th. And I'll do another video like this to explain it to you. I know. It's the end of the semester that we all get weary. We're all tired, right? We're all tired. As students, I'm a student as well. I take one course per semester. Sometimes I take it here at BCC. I like to take face-to-face. But since the pandemic, I've been taking my one course online, so that's opened up to other schools. And right now I'm taking one course at Suffolk University. It's just like what you're doing now, is asynchronous, and there's always more work to do. But it's good for me. It really is good for me. I want my mind to keep going, and it's good for me to listen to your presentations. I think pretty sure it was Justin in our class, did his persuasive speech about how important it is to be with a group, and it's been hard not having the group face-to-face. So you have to create your own group. You have to, watch each other's videos and feel that connection. I always oversay. I do this in the classroom too. Like I'm talking, thinking anything else to say. I think you get the assignment. You're going to interview somebody. You can watch the 2 videos and look at my handout for some inspiration, but about a 5-minute video. If it goes over, it's fine, but usually 5 minutes is enough. Listen to other interviewers, on podcasts, or maybe listen to a sports channel and people are interviewing. We are surrounded by people interviewing all the time. Some people are better at it than others, but it takes practice. It really, really does decades ago, and I mean decades ago, I had my own talk show on radio and AM radio. It used to be on Saturdays and Sundays. My last name at the time was Adler. It was called Adler at Large. And I would interview people from the community, from people who worked in the YMCA to the hospitals to down at the fish houses in New Bedford. And I would interview them about their jobs. And it was a very successful format. I had a lot of callers, but it took a lot of work. It really did. It was when I was young, and I did it. I did get paid, but I did it for pleasure. I'm always interviewing people, and that's a blessing and a curse, because if you meet me for the first time, I tend to interview people without realizing it. And I think it's being polite, like, oh, I care about that person. But sometimes it can exhaust the person. So some of you are going to be better at this than others. But you could have your interview sitting on your bed or the bed of your child and just doing as casually as that. Or you could, change their setting. Or, as I said before, if you have a friend who's not local, as long as they have the internet, you could do an interview on Zoom and tape that. I had a student once who had a friendship through art, like collecting art and buying art online, like through a chat room. And she asked the person, this was when we were face to face, would you come in? I'm in Fall River, Mass. And he wasn't too far away, maybe an hour's ride. So he came in. And so she had a person in real time to be interviewed that she had never met before. Of course, I was a little nervous when I realized this, like, are you bringing into the classroom? But it ended up working out really well. Okay, goodbye for now. Yes, I'm not sick, but all this semester, it feels like all this semester I've had like post-nasal, right? Life's not perfect, but we keep going. But my spirit is good. I'm going to miss watching your videos. As much as it might pain you to do the videos, maybe it doesn't. But realize I see your contributions. I could see your oral communication skills developing, and you have more ease. I can see the ease. If you were speaking every single week in person, or you had your own podcast or radio show, you would see your skills getting better and better. I have tapes of when I first started my radio show. Oh my goodness gracious. I was stumbling over words. I was giggling when I forgot my mind, or I couldn't look at my notes because I was laughing so much. It was awful. But the producers didn't fire me because a lot of people called in, and a lot of my friends called in. And we got sponsorship for it. We sold ads. But I really did get better. I did, just by doing. It's like any other muscle, just keep going. So interview, I can't wait to see who you interview. You are going to make somebody's day by asking them, would you please be part of my class assignment? So, ciao Bella. And if you want to interview me, if we could do it on Zoom, or if you wanted to meet in Fall River at some point and do it live, I'm happy to be interviewed. And you can pick the topic. What do you want to ask me about? I've been interviewed a lot for the decades, mostly because when we've done this live, the rule was if your guest does not show up, you have to pick someone in the room, impromptu, and many students would pick me. And they would have their 10 questions all prepared, and they would try to adapt it to me, and they would ask me 3 questions, and the 5 minutes would go right by. So I was a good person to interview. All right, it's time to go. You're probably not. It's already 18 minutes and 49 seconds. You can't get that time back. So continue, my smart, brave, wonderful students.